The FBI is asking for the public's help in finding Brian Laundrie, the man whose fiancée, Gabby Petito, was found murdered weeks after she was reported missing. And as you and virtually everyone in America knows, Laundrie returned home alone in Petito's van, then refused to talk to police about anything. Laundrie's family claims they haven't seen him since September 14th and that he left town to go to a nature reserve. But that public help request from officials is likely unnecessary, as internet sleuths have been all over this case for weeks now, combing through the pair's Instagram accounts, Spotify profiles, and examining every second of detail from photos and footage of the two, including a police stop that came after someone called 911 saying he saw Laundrie slap Petito and chase her up and down a sidewalk.
We've just been fighting all morning, and he wouldn't let me in the car before. And then
Why wouldn't he let you in the car? Because
he
you're
told me I needed to calm down. Yeah.
The case and all the attention it's gotten has sparked important conversations about domestic violence, misogyny, and policing, but it's also raised a lot of questions about all the missing women cases that don't get the wall-to-wall coverage this one is getting, particularly when it comes to women of color, thousands and thousands of whom who have not merited a minute on your favorite cable news show. Joining me to discuss are Raquel Halsey. She's the executive director of the North American Indian Center of Boston, and the Daily Beast editor-at-large, Molly Jong-Fast, who wrote a piece this week titled "What Gabby Petito's Case Says About Cops and Us." Molly and Raquel, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Molly, if I can start with you for a second. I mentioned missing white woman syndrome, and you can pair it with, I guess, ignore all other missing women syndrome. Is this a result of lack of diversity in newsrooms, giving the customers what they want, or just flat out racism?
You know, I think it's lack of diversity in newsrooms. I think it's a sort of, look, the Gabby Petito story didn't start in newsrooms, right? It started on the internet.
It did.
So I think the cause there is, a culture that prizes beautiful, very thin white women, right? But I also think it's a culture that prizes a certain kind of internet celebrity. And so I think those two things together sort of created a sensation. But it's an extremely good opportunity for us to say, we should be looking at all of these other women who've disappeared, and the people, that this is not a phenomenon, that this is a larger phenomenon. The thing I've been so struck by is just what a bad job the police have done. And, that they are just not aware of what domestic violence looks like. If that's what's happened here. And so that's what strikes me.
I want to get back to the cops in just a couple of seconds. I have to say, Raquel, if I was given that list of three, I would have put racism at the top. And it's in part because we've all read the statistics now coming out of Wyoming, where Petito's body was found, 710 indigenous women and girls missing in the last decade. The parents of some of those women and girls and the pain they've suffered from the loss and the pain they've suffered from their loss being ignored. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's an immeasurable amount of pain and frustration that we hear about at centers like mine and across the country. There's a lack of awareness around who we are, the fact that we exist. So if we, don't exist in somebody's world, how can our data be important? How can the hospitals and the police and the other service centers know to ask whether or not a woman coming to them in crisis or a person coming to them in crisis is Native American? And then when you get to the part of working with police, there's very little tribal liaisons. There are very little consultations with DVSA groups that can support the family through that trauma as they seek answers. We've had a woman in our service area in Boston whose daughter was murdered in 2018, and she still lacks answers. She can't get an answer from the police, from the coroner's office, and she has written every office that she can think of. We've supported her in this, but yet there are still no answers. And that's what it comes down to. our families are doing the work of seeking resolution to what's going on and finding their loved ones before they end up murdered. And there's just no support.
You know, Molly, a perfect segue. You wrote a piece on exactly that, saying that police are more interested in solving cases like this that involve pretty white women. I mean, that is a fact, is it not?
Yeah, I think the policing in America is very, very racist. And I think we see that. And we also see that it's very misogynistic, right? I mean, you see these traffic stop videos and he convinced the police that he was being abused. And then they let them go. I mean, that's preposterous.
Well, I want to correct you if I may, or amend what you say. When you say let them go, their inability, even if there was not racism, to cope with a mental health crisis, when they determine that she may have been the aggressor, he gets to go to a hotel, and a woman who is in crisis is told to sleep by herself in her van in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
I think making the argument that all of America's been talking about, do we need more mental health and less policing?
Yes.
You know?
No, yeah, I mean, clearly, but I also think that what has happened to Indigenous women is an absolute travesty. And if you look at, I mean, the area where she was found, where Gabby Petito was found, is this area where hundreds of young, and a lot of them are children, younger children. And, the return rate is about 20%, there's about 20% that never are returned.
Yeah.
So if you think about that, that's crazy numbers. And I've read more statistics that are even more upsetting. And our police are failing these women. And I think it's, very terrible.
It is terrible. Raquel, getting back to the mother, the family you mentioned a minute ago here, was there an attempt to reach out to the media to say, because I think it's pretty clear, police may pay more attention when there's pressure because there are more eyeballs on the story. Was there an effort to reach out to the media that was thwarted, or was there not?
I think there was some effort, but it's also really hard, I think, to capture the media's attention. As, when you look at everything that's going on at any given point, if one family is reaching out for help, that doesn't get them very far through the newsroom process.
So starting with you, Raquel, and then I'll go to somebody in the media. Molly, how do we reform ourselves? I don't mean you, I mean we. How do we become more sensitized to treating all women and girls equally when it comes to issues like that? And I think a lot trickles down from that, including the police issues that Molly raised a minute ago. How do we reform ourselves, Raquel?
I think it starts with inclusion. Molly's absolutely right in that. I actually grew up around news stations and know very well the hardships that people of color go through in those spaces. And the lack of support and avenues that they have for correction when issues do come up. And when you are coming into a space like that, and you're encountering racism in your workplace, if there are no supports, you're going to go elsewhere. You're going to try to start your own publications. You're going to go into a completely different sector. And that has happened. That's something that our media needs to reckon with and figure out. How do we actually attract and fairly pay people of color?
Are we getting better at that, Molly?
I don't know, because I hope we are. I think there's more effort towards it, but we have a really long way to go. I think it's really important when we talk about this Gabby Petito story, because there are so many women. What I'm curious about, too, is the new Secretary of the Interior has a new initiative to focus on Indigenous women who have been kidnapped. I'm curious to know what you think about that.
You're talking to Raquel, I assume.
Yeah, I'm talking to Raquel.
Of course. What do you think about, and by the way, we should mention, she, of course, is the first Native American person to serve in a cabinet of a president. What do you think about that, Raquel?
I think it's wonderful that we finally have representation at the leadership of the Department of the Interior. The fact that we haven't is, quite frankly, a big part of why we're in this situation now. But before Deb Haaland came into that position, the onus was on Native communities. There were people all across the country who were scrambling and continue to scramble to get data by each state and by each municipality. And so what Deb is doing is trying to create that national, or trying to support the resourcing of a national framework that can capture that data.
You know, one last thing that unfortunately we don't have time for now, but I just want to get it on the record. One other place where the media has failed now, Renee Graham in a brilliant column in the Boston Globe mentioned this, is no context in this Petito situation, meaning talking about domestic violence and how much of domestic violence happens between intimate partners, not just somebody on the street. Yet another lesson that hopefully people like I and others will take away from this. Molly and Raquel, I really appreciate your thoughts and your time. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.